Hey everyone, Longacres Finance here, and it's time for the May 2021 High Yield Dividend Stock Watchlist. The watchlist for May includes 22 unique high yield dividend stocks that each offer a current dividend yield of 2.75% or more. I consider that to be a high yield, but you may have your own threshold. Nevertheless, the watchlist is an automated list of stocks that should offer quality and safety, all the while generating a generous passive income stream in the future. The watchlist from April 2021 rocked a cool 3.72% return for the month. The 19 fairly valued and undervalued stocks from April's watchlist returned 3.07 last month, so slightly worse than the entire watchlist. For perspective, the Vanguard High Yield Dividend ETF VYM returned 2.55% in April. Both the watchlist and the fairly valued and undervalued stocks beat Vanguard's ETF. SPY, the S&P 500 ETF, returned 5.29% in April, and beat both the watchlist and the fairly valued and undervalued stocks from April. The S&P 500 is a very difficult index to beat, and a high-yield dividend investing approach has slim chances of beating the index over the long term. But beating the S&P is not the primary goal of investing in high-yield dividend stocks. As a high-yield investor, your primary goal is to create a passive income stream that is safe, sustainable, and one that will grow in the future. I believe the stocks on this watchlist are a great starting point for further research. I'd like to take a second and thank all my subscribers for the continued support. The channel recently crossed 500 subscribers. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to this growing community of dividend investors. I publish 2 monthly dividend watchlists on this channel and on Seeking Alpha, and then sprinkle in some more dividend videos throughout the month on various topics that pop into my head. Let's go over the watchlist for May now, and after I'll dive deeper into past performance. We will do this by sector and start with utilities. There are 6 utility stocks on the watchlist for May, and they are Evergy, DTE Energy, Southern Company, WEC Energy Group, Alliant Energy Corporation, and Sempra Energy. No new additions here this month, but we did lose CMS Energy and Xcel Energy from the prior month's watchlist. Both those stocks were pretty close to the 2.75% dividend yield threshold and had positive returns last month, so they probably didn't make the cut this month based on their dividend yields. The 6 utility stocks offer an average dividend yield of 3.25%. Southern Company offers the best current dividend yield at 4.05%, and WEC Energy offers the lowest current yield at 2.83%. The average 5-year dividend growth rate for all the utility stocks is a solid 8.85%, with Sempra Energy offering the best growth rate of 14.33%, and Southern having the smallest growth rate of 3.37%. The average payout ratio is a comfortable 63.77%. DTE Energy has the lowest payout ratio at 56.95%, and Evergy has the highest payout ratio at 75.21%. 4 of the 6 utility stocks appear to be either fairly valued or undervalued right now based on dividend yield theory. The utility sector stocks from the prior month had a return of 5.44%. They were the second best sector in April, but they aren't doing so hot since November of 2020. The cumulative return of the utility stocks on the watchlist since November 2020 is 12.4%, and most of those gains came over the last 2 months. The next sector is financials, and we also have 6 stocks this month. They are Toronto-Dominion Bank, Royal Bank of Canada, Comerica, Principal Financial Group, Bank of Montreal, and Truist Financial Corporation. There are no new additions, but we did lose MT Bank that also had a dividend yield last month, not too far above the minimum 2.75% threshold. And the stock had a decent return during April that pushed its dividend yield too low to be on the watchlist. The average dividend yield of the financial stocks is 3.54%. With Principal Financial Group offering the best current dividend yield of 3.8%, and Truist Financial Corporation offering the lowest yield at 3%. The average 5-year dividend growth rate is 11.47%, with Comerica having the highest growth rate at 27.1%, and Bank of Montreal having the lowest growth rate at 5.64%. The average payout ratio is a nice and low 46.81%. Truist has the lowest individual payout ratio, just north of 40%. And the Royal Bank of Canada has the highest payout ratio at 53.46%. 3 of the 6 financial stocks appear to be either fairly valued or undervalued based on dividend yield theory. The financial stocks from April returned 4.95% last month, and they are the best sector of the watchlist on a cumulative basis, with a 51.41% return since November of 2020. The next sector up is consumer staples, and we have a total of 4 stocks here. They are Philip Morris, PepsiCo, Kellogg, and Kimberly-Clark Corporation. No new additions, and none of the stocks dropped off from the prior month. The average dividend yield of these 4 stocks is 3.74%, with Philip Morris offering the best current dividend yield of 5.05%, and Pepsi offering the lowest dividend yield of 2.84%. The average 5-year dividend growth rate is a rather low 4.48%. Pepsi has the highest individual growth rate of 7.8%, and Kellogg has the lowest growth rate at 2.86%. The average payout ratio is 72.01%, with Kellogg having the lowest payout ratio of 60.95% and Philip Morris having the highest payout ratio at 86.41%. All four consumer staple stocks appear to be either fairly valued or undervalued based on dividend yield theory. In the prior month, the consumer staple stocks returned 0.87%. The sector is the second worst performing sector in the watchlist since November of 2020, with a cumulative return of 9.14%. The next sector is information technology. The two stocks from the sector are Cisco and Broadcom. Broadcom is a new addition to the watchlist. The average dividend yield is 2.99%, with Broadcom offering the better dividend yield. The average 5-year dividend growth rate is 32.79%, mainly due to Broadcom's outstanding dividend growth history. The average payout ratio is 79.97%, with Broadcom having a payout ratio of almost 100%, that barely meets the watchlist threshold. Both stocks appear to be either fairly valued or undervalued based on dividend yield theory. The sector had a negative return last month of minus 0.85%. That return came from Cisco, that has been the sole information technology stock on the watchlist, with the exception of Paychex that was included in just the February 2021 watchlist. This sector is the second best sector based on cumulative return since November of 2020, with a return of 40.56%. The next sector is healthcare, and the two stocks from this sector are Amgen and Merck. Merck is a new stock on the watchlist, and we did not lose any stocks in this sector from the prior month. The average dividend yield is 3.26%, with Merck offering the better current dividend yield. The average 5-year dividend growth rate is 10.89%, with Amgen offering the better dividend growth. The average payout ratio is 61.5%, with Amgen having the lower payout ratio of the two. Both stocks appear to be undervalued based on dividend yield theory. The sector had a negative return last month of minus 3.69%. Amgen was the only healthcare stock in last month's watchlist, so the return is entirely tied to the stock. Since November of 2020, the sector has an average cumulative return of 21.10%. There is one industrial stock on this watchlist, and that is 3M Company. We lost Lockheed Martin from the prior month. Lockheed had a dividend yield of 2.81% last month, and a positive return that drove its yield below the threshold. 3M currently offers a dividend yield of 2.97%. They have a 7.48% 5-year dividend growth rate, and a payout ratio of 59.46%. And they appear to be undervalued based on dividend yield theory. The sector had a 2.65% return in April, and is the third best sector in the watchlist since November of 2020, with a cumulative return of 26.83%. And the last stock on the watchlist is RCI from the communications services sector. RCI is a long-running stock in the watchlist, and the only communications stock on the watchlist aside from Viacom CBS that appeared in just the November 2020 watchlist. RCI currently offers a 3.27% dividend yield. They have a 5.67% 5-year dividend growth rate, a 63.09% payout ratio, and appear to be overvalued based on dividend yield theory. This sector had the best return in April, with a 6.79% gain. Since November of 2020, the sector has the fourth highest return of 26.2%. There you have it, 22 high-yield dividend stocks to consider in the month of May 2021. All 22 stocks offer an average dividend yield of 3.38%. That is well above the minimum 2.75% threshold. The 16 fairly valued and undervalued stocks based on dividend yield theory offer a better 3.48% dividend yield. The average dividend growth rate of this month's watchlist is a solid 10.93%, with an average payout ratio of 61.68%. Let's jump over and dig more into past performance now. As I already stated, the watchlist was up 3.72% last month. The 19 fairly valued and undervalued stocks performed a little worse, with a 3.07% return. Both beat VYM that had a 2.55% return, and both lost to SPY that had a solid month returning 5.29%. Since November of 2020, the fairly valued and undervalued stocks are still leading the pack, with a cumulative return of 35.15%. The entire watchlist is following closely with a cumulative return of 34.95%. VYM trails with a cumulative return of 32.37%, and SPY is also behind with a cumulative return of 28.77%. It's nice to see both the watchlist and the fairly valued and undervalued stocks ahead of Vanguard's High Yield Dividend ETF. I think in the long term, SPY should beat both the watchlist and the fairly valued and undervalued stocks, but it's nice to enjoy the current strong run by both. Let's take a quick look at all the individual returns for April. Amgen lost 3.69% and has been on the watchlist for all 6 months, with a cumulative return of 12.04%. Bank of Montreal had a 6.83% return in April, and has also been on the watchlist for all 6 months, with an amazing cumulative return of 61.89% since November 2020. Comerica had a 4.77% return in April, which is a solid start for its first month on the watch list. CMS Energy had a 5.18% return in April, and leaves the watch list with a solid cumulative return of 19% over its 2-month span. Cisco had a negative 0.85% return in April. It has been on the watch list for all 6 months and has a solid cumulative return of 43.98%. DTE Energy had a 5.17% return in April, has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 15.43%. Evergy had a 7.46% return in April, has also been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 18.16%. Kellogg had a negative return of 1.39% in April, and has a cumulative return of 9.24% since joining the watch list in March of 2021. Kimberly-Clark had a negative return of 4.12% in April, but has a 1.82% cumulative return since joining the watch list in February of 2021. Lockheed Martin had a return of 2.99% in April, has been on the watch list for all 6 months but dropped off in May. Lockheed has a cumulative return of 10.32% for the 6 months that it has been on the watch list. Alliant Energy had a return of 4.47% in April, has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 3.2%. 3M had a return of 2.31% in April, has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 25.34%. MT Bank had a return of 4.01% in April, and has been on the watch list for 5 months. The stock dropped off in February but came back in March, and now it once again leaves the watch list. Its cumulative return since November has been 54.79%. This includes February's return. Pepsi had a return of 1.92% in April, and has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 9.8%. Principal Financial Group had a return of 6.52% in April, and has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a phenomenal cumulative return of 66.29%. Philip Morris had a return of 7.05% in April, and has a cumulative return of 14.59% since joining the watch list in March of 2021. Rogers Communications had a return of 6.79% in April, and has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 22.27%. The Royal Bank of Canada had a return of 4.41% in April, and has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 37.57%. Southern Company had a return of 6.45% in April, and has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 17.56%. Sempra Energy had a return of 3.76% in April, and has a cumulative return of 19.62% since joining the watch list in March of 2021. Toronto-Dominion Bank had a return of 6.43% in April, and has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 58.6%. Truist Financial Corporation had a return of 1.7% in April, and has been on the watch list for all 6 months with a cumulative return of 43.39%. WEC Energy Group had a return of 3.83% in April, and has a cumulative return of 6.44% since joining the watch list in January of 2021. Xcel Energy had a return of 7.2% in April, and has a cumulative return of 22.59% since joining the watch list in March of 2021. The stock has dropped off the watch list this month after a very solid 2 months. There are 16 stocks that have previously been on the watch list but have dropped off. These 16 stocks had a 2.23% average return in April. I keep tracking these stocks because I practice a buy and hold approach with my personal investments, and I thought it would be useful to track how this approach would perform with this watch list. In April, the buy and hold mock portfolio had a return of 3.63%, which is slightly worse than the watch list return of 3.72%. The buy and hold approach only to the fairly valued and undervalued stocks had a return of 3.08%, which is in line with April's return for the fairly valued and undervalued stocks of 3.07%. Both the buy and hold approaches to the entire watch list and the fairly valued and undervalued stocks are beating VYM comfortably on a cumulative basis. The equal allocation buy and hold approach has a cumulative return of 36.84%, the fairly valued and undervalued stocks have a cumulative return of 38.27%, and VYM is trailing with a cumulative return of 32.37%. High yield stocks have been running pretty hot since I've begun tracking this watch list. This is a great reward to high yield dividend investors, but I wouldn't expect this to continue indefinitely, so enjoy it while it lasts. If you have any questions, leave a comment below, or email me at longacresfinance@gmail.com. That's it, thank you for watching and see you next time.